Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It puts our reputation as an exporter and as a supplier of product in question.
China sticks a fork in pork and beef imports from Canada also.
And it looks like it would be a pamphlet that is age appropriate for this group.
A BC elementary school is apologizing after offering young students an explicit safe sex ed pamphlet. And
I sort of remember writing it a little bit. It's a long time ago.
Cracking open the time capsule they buried 50 years ago at a Vancouver school.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening. Parents are furious and education officials are apologizing tonight after an elementary school in the Kootenays mistakenly handed out a graphic safe sex education manual to grade 7 students.
our John Hernandez joins us now, and a warning, some of the material in this story is sexually explicit. So John, sex ed begins well before grade 7 here in BC. What is it about this particular pamphlet?
Well, school boards in British Columbia are meant to teach kids about the dangers of sexually transmitted diseases at ages 11 through 12. That's when that's the age of these students that got handed this explicit pamphlet. Now, the problem with this pamphlet is that it's got some extremely graphic animated images, and the images aren't necessarily the most alarming part. There's also some very graphic text associated with each picture, some of which go on to explain some very graphic sexual acts and fetishes. So these got handed out to a grade 6 and 7 split classroom. I managed to get in touch with one of the parents of the students in that class. Liz Anderson's 12-year-old son, Garrett, got a chance to take a look at this book following the course.
My son received the book, looked at it, and handed it to another child in a different classroom. I think that this book was on the side of almost sexual assault, really, teaching children this kind of crap. On my part, I think it was the health nurse and the principal should have went through that book before it was even allowed in the school.
Okay, John, pretty shocking stuff. How did this even end up in the students' hands?
So it was a 3-day course led by a public health nurse, and she had an accompanying nursing student with her to help lead the class. Now, after the 3 days, they wanted to leave behind some learning materials, so they brought in some of these pamphlets that were based out of their office. And as you can tell, it's a very vibrant and cartoonish appearance, so it didn't really seem alarming at first glance, but that's because they didn't actually have a look at some of the text. And on one of the front pages of this book, it even says it's intended for a mature audience. That's 19 years and older. So these were essentially handed out without either the teacher, principal, or even the public health nurse taking a good close look about what the pamphlet actually said. I spoke to the superintendent of the school, Christine Perkins. Here's what she had to say.
We have issued apologies, offered counseling to families. We're phoning every single parent. We've got counseling through the summer if anybody wants it. And we've sent letters home today, and there's also phone calls to everybody today as well.
So obviously a bit of a slip up on the part of multiple people involved here, but the school has promised to improve its vetting process for all third-party educational materials like this one. Anita, Mike?
Our John Hernandez, thank you.
Thanks.
A retired Army veteran in Courtenay is fighting the province's guide and service dog legislation. William Webb says the rules discriminate against him and his dog, Jessie.
As Belpuri reports, that's ignited a call for a Canadian set of standards for the guide and service dog sector as a whole.
For the past 5 years, William Webb and Jessie have been inseparable.
Prior to me receiving my dog, I was a shut-in.
Webb was in the military for 19 years. In 2011, when a suicide bomber blew apart a bus in Kabul and killed 17 people, Webb saw it happen.
Upon my return, like most soldiers that suffer trauma, we minimize and deny what's going on in our lives.
In Manitoba, Webb was paired with Jessie, a psychiatric service dog, to help manage post-traumatic stress disorder. When Webb is anxious, having flashbacks or night terrors, Jessie is trained to distract him. She was taught and certified by a Winnipeg company that most recently provided dogs to survivors of the Humboldt hockey team bus crash. In 2016, Webb and Jessie moved to BC.
I was confronted in Nanaimo at the time at Woodgrove Mall and told my dog could not be in the mall because it wasn't a certified service dog. I explained to them that it was, provided the ID I had, and they still asked me to leave.
BC only recognizes dogs trained by groups that belong to Assistance Dogs International in the USA or the International Guide Dog Federation. Dogs trained by others have to be assessed every 2 years to get a $200 BC identification card. Webb had one in 2016, but now that it's expired, he'd rather fight it than renew it. Without the card, Webb and Jessie have been denied service on transit and BC Ferries, as well as access to public buildings.
The service dog sector is quickly emerging as a highly competitive multi-million-dollar business. Insiders say terms like certification and accreditation are often misconstrued. That's because no one has set standards for the industry as a whole.
Canada-wide rules, it's believed, would eliminate situations like Webb's.
There needs to be a national standard as a benchmark that can be adopted throughout the provinces and territories, so there's consistency.
Alberta and Nova Scotia have the same restrictive policy as BC. Prince Edward Island is considering it. Webb wants it repealed.
The process is flawed. I believe the government knows that it's flawed, but they're not willing to look at it.
BC's Minister of Public Safety declined an interview, but his staff said the agencies recognized by the province have high standards for training service dogs. Webb doesn't dispute that, but a law that excludes all other dog providers, he says, is wrong. Belle Puri, CBC News, Courtney.
An arrest has been made after a killing in Vancouver's Riley Park neighborhood. It happened just before 10 last night near Main Street and East 35th Avenue. Officers were called to investigate reports of a shooting at an apartment building in the area. When they entered one of the apartments, they found a 30-year-old man dead from a gunshot wound. Not long after, another man, also in his 30s, was arrested not far from the scene.
Our major crimes investigators are attempting to determine exactly what did occur last night and all of the circumstances that led up to this incident.
Police are still working to confirm the identity of the man who was killed. This is the 5th homicide this year in Vancouver, and police are asking anyone with information to give them a call.
And homicide detectives in Vancouver are also investigating a suspicious death at a business in the city's south side. Police were called to McIver's Appliance Sales and Service near Ontario Street and East 69th Avenue shortly before 8:30 this morning. 78-year-old John Leslie McIver was pronounced dead at the scene there. Police not releasing any other details, but say no arrests have been made. Anyone with information is asked to call VPD or Crime Stoppers.
Meanwhile, the driver of a car doing donuts through the downtown east side last night is now facing charges. A 37-year-old man is accused of dangerous driving after police say a gray Toyota was seen heading toward pedestrians and into oncoming traffic. The car was also caught on video spinning donuts in the middle of 2 intersections.
It was obviously a very dangerous situation, not knowing why this was happening, but driving close to pedestrians and driving onto oncoming vehicles head-on, very dangerous, very erratic. And we're happy that we're able to resolve this with no injuries.
Robillard says police will also be recommending a charge of impaired driving.
A BC furniture salesman who killed a romantic rival has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. Randy Scott had a brief fling with a co-worker at the Brick in Pitt Meadows, but the woman ended the relationship and asked Scott to leave her alone. Later, when he discovered she was seeing another co-worker, an enraged Scott shot the 33-year-old man multiple times in the head outside of Maple Ridge Church. You can read more about this story, including details about the hours leading up to the shooting, on our website, cbcnews.ca/BC.
A faulty electrical appliance is being blamed for starting an apartment fire that left a woman dead in Saanich last week. 4 people had to be pulled off balconies as the flames spread early Friday morning. Saanich Fire points to either a space heater, a speaker, or a malfunctioning power bar, but they say more work is needed to figure out the exact cause. The blaze left 31 units of the apartment uninhabitable. No word on when residents will be able to return.
Surrey RCMP are once again asking for the public's help in finding a missing 3-year-old child. Bryson Tone was last seen June 18th in Surrey. Police were alerted after his mother failed to report with him as required by the Family Act in order to check on his well-being. His mother, Melissa Sue Seal, was last seen at about 5 p.m. June 20th. It's believed the toddler is in the company of his mother. Anyone with information is asked to call police.
Well, beef and pork farmers in BC appear to be caught in the middle of escalating tensions between China and Canada, with the Chinese now suspending all Canadian meat imports.
Our Tanya Fletcher has more from producers who are worried about how bad the impact could be if the dispute isn't resolved soon.
To have this happen right now is, of course, disappointing.
That disappointment coming a day after the Chinese embassy announced it's halting all shipments of beef and pork from Canada. The reason? Inspectors claim a restricted feed additive was found in a batch of Canadian pork products. The investigation that followed allegedly turned up fake veterinary health certificates as well. But many are skeptical, including BC's Premier.
I can't help but see this as being connected in some way to the Huawei extradition process. So we're going to work hard to make sure that these alleged fraudulent certificates are exposed if they exist, and we'll go from there.
Only about 1% of Canada's beef exports go to China, and BC's contribution is roughly $5 million a year in product. The group that represents 1,200 cattle ranchers in this province worries what will happen if the dispute is not resolved quickly.
The big thing is the long-term ability to move more product in there and create stability for us is in jeopardy on this.
The industry group that represents BC pork producers is also concerned.
China has, over the years, has been a growing market and a premium market, and some of the other markets might not give the producers and the processors the same returns.
The MLA, who represents many farmers in the Fraser Valley, says this all points to political play.
This is intimidation, pure and simple. It's economic, commercial intimidation, but it's intimidation nonetheless, and I think the Chinese government should be ashamed of themselves.
He says Canada should be sending a strong message to China that we'll take our business elsewhere.
What you will see the farmers and the producer groups do is seek out more reliable trading partners. You don't want to be held hostage.
China had previously suspended pork imports from 3 Canadian producers in recent months. It all has farmers here in the Fraser Valley and across Canada hoping this latest ban will be lifted soon and for good. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Abbotsford.
A former Olympic skier from BC has launched a class action lawsuit against Alpine Canada. Alison Forsyth alleges ski officials turned a blind eye while a predatory coach abused young female athletes. The case revolves around former Team Canada coach Bertrand Charest. 2 years ago, he was found guilty of 37 sex-related crimes against 9 teenage girls. The lawsuit claims Alpine Canada was slow to act on the allegations and that it eventually allowed Bertrand to resign without alerting the police. None of the allegations have been tested in court. 3 of the skiers who were victimized by Charest have filed a separate lawsuit against Alpine Canada.
BC Ferries is canceling some long weekend sailings between Horseshoe Bay and Langdale as one of its vessels is out of service. The Queen of Coquitlam will be undergoing repairs for about a week. Up to 3 water taxis, though, will operate on the route in its place. Some of the reservation cancellations include the 5:30 p.m. sailing on Friday from Horseshoe Bay and the 4:20 p.m. sailing from Langdale on Canada Day.
Well, containers of Canadian trash left in the Philippines for years are set to arrive at the Port of Vancouver this Saturday. It all started when more than 100 containers arrived in the Philippines, falsely labeled as plastics for recycling in 2013 and 2014. The garbage saga caused a diplomatic dispute, with President Rodrigo Duterte calling the ambassador and the consul general last month after Canada missed the deadline to take back the trash. 34 containers were disposed of in the Philippines, with the remaining 69 costing over $1 million to bring back to Canada. The trash will be incinerated in Burnaby.
A Vancouver man is complaining about the city's empty homes tax after he got a nasty surprise recently, an unexpected $17,000 tax bill.
As the CBC's Rafferty Baker explains, it ended up being a question of how a space is defined.
Last year, Sean Moore used his property on Pacific Street as an office. Its unique zoning permits that, or he could use it as a residence, or some combination of both. But since he was audited for the municipal empty homes tax, it's been complicated.
I've had to spend like 30 hours on this audit, call lawyers, call tax accountants, that's a cumbersome additional expense as well.
Moore says he was confident the audit would turn out fine, but in the end, he got a hefty tax bill, nearly $17,000.
And yet they're forcing us to pay a vacancy tax when in fact the property has never been vacant.
Moore runs a digital marketing agency. For most of 2018, he and his staff used the 3-story townhouse daily. Despite the flexible municipal zoning, city officials say the decision on how a property is classified and whether the owner will have to pay the empty homes tax is actually up to BC Assessment. If they are classed as residential, then they must file a declaration as per the city's empty homes tax. And if they are not occupied for residential purposes or rented, then they would be required to pay the tax. Moore says he may have to rethink what he does with his property. He may have to rent it out strictly as residential and give up that flexible mixed use, which is why he bought it in the first place. Otherwise, he'll be paying thousands of dollars in the new tax each year. Rafferty Baker, CBC News, Vancouver.
An evacuation alert issued for several properties near Pender Harbor on the Sunshine Coast has now been lifted. The homes on Cecil Hill Road were on alert for 24 hours as the wildfire burned on the slope above them. The fire broke out Monday evening, and since then more than 24 firefighters and several helicopters have been fighting the fire, which is 9 hectares in size.
All right, Brett Soderholm is here now. And Brett, how is that fire threat looking?
Well, there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is that rain is on the way, and that is going to definitely help to lower the rating across the whole province. But the bad news, quite frankly, is the fact that it has been a very active day, thunderstorm-wise, across the entire province, including the Sunshine Coast, Vancouver Island, and just the mainland. I wanted to show you what you're going to be looking at very soon, actually, is a look at all of the lightning strikes that have happened across the province in just the past 3 hours alone. Now, you're going to notice that, first of all, it's very widespread. In the north, where it's particularly dry, this is probably one of the most precarious situations because, as we know, lightning can very quickly ignite any type of fire. And in addition to that, in the south, right now as we speak, there are a series of storms that are moving right into the Fraser Valley. And with that, we know conditions in the region are quite dry. We do have severe thunderstorm watches in effect for the western coast of Vancouver Island right now. There's, in fact, a severe thunderstorm warning up into the BC Peace, including the city of Dawson City. And then down to the south, we've got watches along the travelers' routes, and in fact, just right now, as I mentioned it, that actually just got upgraded into a warning. Now, the reason for that, I'm quite sure, and I don't actually know, I'm going to have to go out on a limb here. If you're looking at the radar, there should be a cell pushing right into the area of concern, and I can in fact zoom in a little bit closer to that. That is going to be the one to be watching, heading right toward Chilliwack. So it is an active night, but more rain is coming, and as I said, I'll have more on that coming up.
All right, Brett, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, here's the question tonight. What do you do with your old VHS tapes? So
VHS?
I happen to have a few at home, namely my favorite Little Mermaid VHS that I can't get rid of.
Yeah, we gave a lot of those away. I still have some in boxes, though, just in storage.
Just sitting there?
Yeah, just sitting there. But unlike us, one Vancouver artist uses the old tapes and recycles them into art. Her latest piece says she's inspired by the recent garbage dispute between Canada and the Philippines.
Recycle your tape. My name is Evelyn Roth. I'm an artist from Vancouver originally, and now I live in Australia. My field, my work has been to do with recycling and looking after our environment. From the early 1970s, when I discovered that 2-inch videotape that your television programs were put on was basically thrown away, and it was a great linear form and very strong to crochet various articles with. This is 1970 CBC videotape woven by Evelyn Roth, and it's a very cool suit. This is the type of tape some of you may still have in your house from, you watching your video machine. So we bust them up. I've used 6 strands of videotape at the same time and used my hand as a crochet hook. So that was recycling with a lot of fun, and it was playing with media and television and medium.
Welcome to CBC and an interview with none other than Evelyn Roth.
I first made the TV trap, which was crocheted out of the 2-inch CBC tape, and it's basically you're caught inside a body, but your head is captured by television. And we all are caught by television in one way or another. Television tells us who you vote for. Television says what you should eat. Sorry, folks, that's it.
I can tell you I'm not giving up my Little Mermaid tape for that.
Not all in the name of art?
No,
Really?
it's nice, but I cherish that thing. So.
Don't get me started on Beta. Anyway, that's another story. Okay, you can catch up on all of today's news by watching this newscast live and on demand on our free mobile app, CBC Gem.
Yes, and CBC Vancouver is also available on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And if you want up-to-date updates on stories as they break, you can follow us on Twitter at CBC News BC.
Well, after 19 years between the pipes, Roberto Luongo is hanging up his goalie pads. Coming up, why the Vancouver Canucks will still be paying Lou millions of dollars for several more years.
A unique, environmentally friendly house in Nova Scotia is turning heads. The owners claim it's the logical next step in saving the ocean and the planet.
Why, you ask? Well, it's made of recycled water bottles, more than 500,000 of them, in fact. CBC's Brett Ruskin checked it out.
When these two entrepreneurs told people they were building a plastic house,
they looked at us like we were crazy.
But here it is.
Nice full-size vanity, double vanity, bathtub, soaker tub. Regular house stuff.
Under the surface, though, it's far from regular. The walls are 6-inch thick melted plastic.
So this is a shredded PET, the first step in the recycling process.
PET is polyethylene terephthalate. There's a good chance you've drank out of it recently.
How many other homes are like this in this area, in Canada, in the world?
None.
It also has an unbeatable view.
This is a rooftop terrace. This is directly above the living room.
And all of this was built very fast.
We put up all the walls in about 7 hours, and then we put the roof in another 7 hours. So it took us 14 hours to put the house up.
You put all the walls up in one day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those walls withstood testing in Category 5 hurricane strength winds, and they're super energy efficient.
We're 2.3, 2.5 times the efficiency of a normal home.
All this for around the same price as a conventional home. The team has boat building expertise and used some of those techniques and materials here on land.
You know, just taking from one industry and transferring it over to another, thinking a bit outside the box and making it work.
You know, you're saving the planet, you're saving the oceans, you're taking all this PET out of the environment and making stuff with it, making a beautiful beach house like this one.
Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Metegan River, Nova Scotia.
Different idea.
Perhaps that's the future.
Maybe. And the property there? That
prime waterfront,
wow.
Nothing around it.
No kidding.
Can't say I wouldn't love to visit it.
Okay, stay with us. Stan Burrett's going to be here in just a sec to explain how Roberto Luongo's retirement is going to have a lasting impact on the Canucks, at least for the next few years. That's next. Well, Kirk McLean fans may disagree, but Roberto Luongo is arguably the best goalie the Vancouver Canucks have ever had. Today, He announced he is retiring from hockey.
And even though he hasn't played in Vancouver in years, his decision does affect the current Canucks. CBC Vancouver News at 11 host Dan Burritt is here now, live with more. Dan, what is the impact?
Well, first, let's start with how Roberto Luongo announced his retirement today. Take a look. I've decided to take my talents to a South Beach retirement home. Well done, Strombone One. Luongo has played for the Florida Panthers since 2014. And in a letter to fans today, he admitted his body is done and he's listening to it. Luongo was the Canucks starting backstop for 8 seasons, as we know, and helped lead them to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final in 2011. We know how that turned out. He's a 5-time All-Star, though, and helped Canada win gold in men's Olympic hockey in 2010 and 2014. He has 489 career victories, 3rd all-time on the list behind only Martin Brodeur and Patrick Waugh. Another part of his legacy in Vancouver, though, is his sizable contract and the way it's structured. And he knew that years ago.
My contract sucks. That's what the problem is, and unfortunately, it's a big factor in trading me, and it's probably why I'm still here.
Here's the impact now. When the Vancouver Canucks traded Luongo to Florida in 2014, they agreed to retain $800,000 of his salary. Now that he's retired, though, under NHL rules and what's called a recapture penalty, that number goes up to $3 million, a net increase of 2.2. So the website, capfriendly.com, says before today, the Canucks had close to $18 million to re-sign players and pursue free agents. With Luongo retiring, that number goes down to 15.5, as you can see. And with key players like Brock Besser and Josh Levo still without contracts, the Canucks will be a little more limited in what they can do this offseason.
All right, Dan, so the Canucks squeezed a bit more now financially. What does Luongo think of his time in Vancouver?
Well, he is nothing but complimentary today. Read this. In that long letter to fans, he says, quote, I want to take a moment to thank the people of Vancouver. I'll never forget the impact that city and their fans made not only in my career, but on my life as well. They will hold a special place in my heart. Now, Lou plans to retire to Florida. He and his family are moving to a new home in Parkland, the site of that horrific shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School last year. Luongo paid tribute to the 17 victims in a pre-game on-ice video days later for the Panthers. He says Parkland will be his family's home for the rest of their time here on Earth. Quite a legacy. Anita, Mike?
For certain. All right, Dan, thanks very much.
Well, it's still just an idea. The Tampa Bay Rays playing some of their home games in Montreal. But today, baseball fans in the city had reason to hope.
Yeah, the son of the Montreal Expos founding owner, Charles Bronfman, is trying to bring the old ball game back. But as Allison Northcott reports, it'll take more than just a good pitch.
What did you do with bat?
For some young players, even the idea of a professional baseball team for Montreal to call its own is a motivator.
These teams, like in Toronto, they're much more into baseball because of the Blue Jays and all of that, and they're much more like passionate.
More kids are going to start playing baseball and they're going to start getting into baseball.
Montreal hasn't had a major league team since the Expos left in 2004, and some fans have been eagerly waiting for baseball to somehow return.
I'm all in for trying something groundbreaking, and I really think that Montrealers will jump on that bandwagon.
Stephen Bronfman says pairing up with the Tampa Bay Rays could be the answer in an arrangement that would see the team split its time between Florida and Montreal.
I think people just want to see baseball, and people are adaptable. I think it's a great chance to have summer baseball in Montreal and to do it with great professionals and true partners.
The Rays owner says teaming up with Montreal could be a lifeline.
We are at or near the bottom in every economic category in Major League Baseball. This is a reality, and we can all confront it together.
The Rays are locked in a lease to play in Florida until the end of the 2027 season.
Get all your stuff out.
In Montreal, there's some skepticism about sharing a team.
Our aspirations are really for something a lot more than just a part-time city team.
There are questions, too, about the economic viability of the idea, since the Rays owner says he envisions new open-air stadiums in both cities.
I just don't see a scenario in which this is going to work. Too many logistical hurdles, and I think the stadium thing is a killer. You cannot build 2 stadiums for $2 billion with public money in 2 cities that don't want to give public money.
Still, he says the discussions could be a stepping stone to bring Montreal a little closer to once again having a full-time team. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Coming up, more on China's ban on Canada's meat and how the Prime Minister will try to make peace with Beijing at the G20 summit. Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We have issued apologies, offered counseling to families. We're phoning every single parent.
A BC elementary school is apologizing tonight to parents for offering young students an explicit safe sex education pamphlet. The 47-page book features cartoons with graphic descriptions of sex acts. Several students took it home.
A BC furniture salesman who killed a romantic rival has been sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 14 years. Randy Scott had a brief fling with a co-worker at the Brick in Pitt Meadows, but the woman ended the relationship and asked Scott to leave her alone. Later, when he discovered she was seeing another co-worker, an enraged Scott shot the man multiple times in the head. Well, Canada has launched an investigation into fake Canadian export certificates used to send pork to China. It comes the day after China suspended all Canadian meat imports.
Chinese officials say a banned feed additive was found in a batch of pork that came from Canada. As Ottawa tries to find out what happened, Alison Dempster looks at the potential impact of China's move on Canadian meat producers.
At this farm in central Alberta, hogs are getting fattened up for market. These days, China makes up about 20% of the market for Canadian pork. So far this year, producers have exported more than $300 million worth, and they were hoping to sell a lot more.
It's disappointing to know that, corners were cut or something had happened or was forged.
Jessica Fasoli has a lot of questions about what happened with the batch of problem pork. She raises her pigs on feed without growth additives and has the documents to prove it. Fasoli steers clear of one additive in particular, known as a muscle drug.
We as Canadian farmers go to great lengths to make sure that we're ractopamine free.
Ractopamine is the additive Chinese officials say they detected in a batch of Canadian pork products, prompting them to suspend all meat imports, including beef. While China is a small market for beef producers, amounting to just 2% of exports, they still want to see the suspension lifted as soon as possible.
This is an issue that is with pork, so we have been communicating with the Canadian government, who is investigating why beef has been included in this export certificate halt.
We take our food inspection with the greatest of seriousness, and we will not tolerate anything that detracts from our reputation.
Hog farmers welcome the federal government's investigation, but they say time is of the essence.
If the ban continues to be in place, we're going to have an oversupply of pork, a lot like what the U.S. has had. A lot of pork in supply means that the prices drop.
Fasoli and other producers hope the Prime Minister can ease trade tensions with China at the upcoming G20 summit. A lucrative and growing Canadian pork market depends on it. Alison Dempster, CBC News, Calgary.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his wife Sophie Gregoire left Ottawa this morning, bound for Osaka, Japan, and the latest G20 summit. Trudeau is hoping to meet the leader of China at that summit to ease trade tensions and raise concern about 2 Canadians being detained there. It is widely expected, though, much of the summit discussion will involve both the Chinese and U.S. presidents, now locking horns over billions of dollars in trade and tariffs. Evan Dyer reports.
Well, this group of 20 meeting is coming together at a time when the global trading system is under a great deal of pressure, with a lot of that pressure coming from one of those leaders, President Donald Trump, who of course swore to shake things up and rebalance trade in favor of the United States, and whose favorite method for achieving that is tariffs. So currently about half of all Chinese goods entering the United States are already under tariffs. Donald Trump is threatening to put the remaining half, about $325 billion worth of goods, under tariffs as well. China would of course retaliate. There is no specific deadline on that threat, but it's one that worries economists because they fear it could lead to a kind of a decoupling of those 2 economies. Their trading relationship is almost a third of the world's trade. In addition, Donald Trump is threatening by mid-September to impose a 25% tariff on cars and trucks coming from Europe and Japan. So the European Union and Japan have both said they will retaliate strongly to that, another major shock potentially to the world trading system. And there are fears that instead of rebalancing trade in the U.S.'s favor, this will simply lead to a shrinking of world trade where everybody buys less from everybody, and some worrying numbers coming out of China seem to point in that direction. China buying about a quarter less from the United States than a year ago, perhaps not so surprising considering those tariffs, but also buying significantly less from Japan and South Korea, which suggests that there may be an overall winding down of China's purchasing of foreign goods. Canada, of course, also has some very specific business it wants to conduct in Japan, and that has to do with Canadian detainees held in China. Prime Minister Trudeau is hoping to meet President Xi Jinping and discuss that issue, or at least have President Donald Trump discuss it on his behalf, as he promised to do last week in the Oval Office. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Ottawa.
Just coming up on 6:39 on this Wednesday evening, a live look at downtown Vancouver tonight from our tower camera. A gorgeous day here on the South Coast. Hope you enjoyed it because there's a change in the weather coming. Brett's forecast is next. Brett's here now with the forecast. It was a pretty nice day today, but you got some active weather out east.
Yeah, so active weather, I mean, across the province, but then also Ontario, Quebec. We had some thunderstorms go right through the capital, actually. Ottawa got a few of those. So I think all across the country, really active would be the way to describe it. Now, in terms of rainfall, we are going to be getting that tonight and into the early morning, so this is great. We definitely need the rain. But then again, I mentioned there was that thunderstorm earlier. I'm going to go back and talk about that in just a brief second, but I did still want to show you what it looked like this morning over the North Shore Mountains. We actually had some really beautiful clouds there, nice illumination of the sky, and then the sun came out. And I'll be honest, I don't know about you, but even if I am from eastern portions of this country, it felt humid today in Vancouver. I actually felt that, and I don't know if you did, but chances are that if I thought that it was a little bit humid, you probably did as well. I wanted to start off with this. I mentioned it really quickly. This updated in real time while I was outside. This is a severe thunderstorm warning in effect right now, specifically for, let's say, Chilliwack over to Hope. We're watching two storms very closely at this point in time. One's going over the provincial parks in this region, so it's probably not too bad, but I did want to draw your attention to what's going on closer to Abbotsford and to Mission. So we have these little storms. Anytime that you see a color there that's in the red or in the purple, that means that it's really heavy rain or potentially even hail falling over the region. So over the next half an hour, if you do find yourself towards Abbotsford and Mission, do watch out because you could get some very quick and intense downpours. Now, in addition to that, this is just thunderstorm-related rain, but we do actually have a lot of what I would call synoptic rain, or rain associated with the low pressure system. This is going to be going all the way across the region throughout the pre-dawn hours, and if you look at that, that is Thursday, 6 o'clock in the morning. You are in the lower mainland, you are getting rain. It is going to be lasting throughout much of the morning, maybe even into the early afternoon, but then clearing out quite nicely throughout the evening hours, and that is going to be the trend as we get into the long weekend. The overall totals here, and again, I'll try to move my way out of this legend here, 10 to 20 millimeters is possible at most. I would probably say about 10 millimeters for downtown Vancouver, and as I mentioned, for the south coast of Vancouver Island, where they desperately need the rain, rain. We do need that. Now, the fire danger rating, as I said, is probably going to go down quite nicely because of this rain and the cooler temperatures. And as we head into the long weekend, I know this is what everyone is probably watching for right now. A little cooler, as I said, Thursday, tomorrow with all of that rain. Lingering showers potentially on Friday, but then Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, as of right now, I don't want you to hold me to it, but it is looking pretty darn nice. So if you have any outdoor plans or things to be doing this weekend, I think it's going to be a good one for that.
That's amazing.
Are you allowed to say we can't hold you to it every time?
Well, because it's still 3 days out. When it's Friday, could talk to me on Friday, I will give my formal official forecast for
right.
that.
A little asterisk.
Yeah, just a little, like, yeah, got to pat it a little bit. But
It's a good thing we don't have any money on this ever.
It's very true.
Thanks, Brent.
You're welcome.
Outrage over a photo of a father and daughter dead in a river. After the break, more on the pair who tried to cross from Mexico into the U.S.
A disturbing picture of a father and daughter dead in a river is sparking outrage tonight.
The two were reportedly trying to make their way into the U.S. from Mexico.
As Ellen Morrow explains, the image is not only breaking hearts, it's driving conversation in Washington, D.C. And a warning, we are going to be showing the image that some will find disturbing.
The bodies of a young father and his daughter, not yet 2 years old, carried away. The girl's mother crying in the background. The two died in the Rio Grande, the scene captured in a harrowing image you're about to see. Oscar Alberto Ramirez Martinez and his daughter Valeria, her arm resting on her father's neck, had traveled from El Salvador. The blame game is fully underway.
If we had the right laws that the Democrats are not letting us have, those people, they wouldn't be coming up. They wouldn't be trying.
President Trump, I want you to look at this photo. These are not drug dealers or vagrants or criminals. They are people simply fleeing a horrible situation in their home country.
More than 130,000 people were stopped trying to cross the border last month alone. So far this year, the United Nations says 170 people have died or gone missing attempting the journey.
Simply put, the
the current humanitarian crisis has forced us to put border security and national security at risk.
And the pressure is on Congress.
I hope that picture alone will catalyze this Congress, this Senate, this committee to do something.
But lawmakers are struggling, disagreements raging over conditions at detention facilities where child migrants reportedly lack food and places to bathe. Some analysts argue that migrants are being driven in part by President Trump's rhetoric.
There is a belief that Donald Trump is at some point going to be able to close the border, and so it'll become more difficult, so go now.
Meanwhile, the grief is only beginning for Rosa Ramirez, mourning a son and a granddaughter gone too soon. All they wanted, she says, was a better future in the United States. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Washington.
A United Nations official says the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia should be investigated for murder.
In October, journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi embassy in Turkey.
Now, as Thomas Dagler reports, a UN report says there's evidence the Saudi leadership is involved.
The UN Special Rapporteur who looked into the murder of Jamal Khashoggi pointed straight to Saudi Arabia today when presenting the findings of her investigation to the UN Human Rights Council. The investigator, Agnès Karamal, says this murder should be classified as an international killing and requires an international investigation. Many believe who is ultimately responsible to be Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, but she says it wasn't up to her to decide that either.
The inquiry was a human rights inquiry, not a criminal investigation. It has nevertheless found credible evidence warranting further investigation of high-level Saudi officials' individual liability, including that of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and of his key advisor, Saud al-Qahtani.
The reaction from member states who've been speaking today has been overwhelmingly in favor of more scrutiny and more transparency from Saudi Arabia. The dissenting voices included Saudi Arabia and its key regional ally, the United Arab Emirates, both criticizing the investigation from the UN Human Rights Council and its findings. Here's the Saudi representative speaking through an interpreter today in Geneva.
Accusations have been launched and fingers have been pointed, and she hasn't personally participated in the investigations, nor is she aware of the efforts deployed by our kingdom to carry out these investigations.
Khashoggi's fiancé has called on the international community to use the evidence in this newly released UN report as a roadmap for that long-awaited criminal inquiry, which so far has not materialized. Thomas Dagler, CBC News, London.
A new farming program is trying to make Canada feel a bit more like home for a group of Yazidi refugees.
They were forced to flee northern Iraq to escape the violence of ISIS, bringing years of farming experience with them when they arrived in Winnipeg.
As Cameron McIntosh explains, the program hopes to make the transition easier by offering them something familiar.
It's far from home, but there's a familiar, secure feeling in this soil for Adol Elias.
So you're normally a farmer?
Yes, we survived off of a family farm, and even as a young child, I've done it every single year since I remember.
She and about a dozen others here are Yazidi refugees who fled the ISIS reign of terror in northern Iraq in 2014. Elias and 5 of her children were among 1,200 refugees from the region brought to Canada. No longer on government assistance, she's participating in this fledgling farm program, planting fruits and vegetables to help refugee families put food on the table.
This is the kind of work that we're familiar with. It's hard work, but we really enjoy it. So this is really fun for us.
Every single government-sponsored family is struggling.
Michelle Aziza is with Operation Ezra, a multi-faith coalition that helps refugees get settled. It developed the farm program.
Our plan is to produce enough food to provide these families, but also to produce, because we will produce more food than what's needed. The food will be sold at local farmers markets. The money that's generated will be used for next year.
The hope is to grow several tons of food here. The land, 5 acres, is donated.
I thought they deserved a good start in Canada, so we offered the land that they can have a vegetable farm here.
But really, this is about more than just food. Majid Haji was a farmer in Iraq. His translator says for him, this is a return to something closer to normal.
He thought back home, back in Iraq, right away when he first touched the soil.
This brought back great memories when we were safe and sound in our villages and our homes.
Seeding a new life in Canada while providing for themselves. Cameron McIntosh, CBC News, near Winnipeg.
50 years after it went underground at Kerrisdale Elementary, a time capsule was opened up today. What was inside? Well, we'll show you and meet those who helped make the capsule next. They were only in elementary school when they buried a time capsule.
Fast forward 50 years, and today, former Kerrisdale Elementary School students cracked open the treasure they stowed away oh so long ago. The CBC's Tina Lovegreen was there for the unveiling.
50 years is a long time.
I remember calculating how old we'd be in 2019 and thinking that was pretty old.
It was 1969 when a Kerrisdale Elementary School class buried a time capsule. Former students curious to know what was inside.
We've been waiting since we were 7.
Ken Paris brought his daughter to see the treasures of the past.
So since I was about 5 years old, I've been waiting to see what is the treasure that he buried.
Is that you? Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. So cool.
The treasure trove is mostly letters students wrote to their future selves.
We still have hippies, but I suppose they'll all be gone in your time.
I remember saying I was going to be a nurse and that I was going to drive a jet to work. And what happened? I'm a nurse.
They also jammed in a few other items.
Pretty sure we put in a baseball and a chalkboard eraser and some chalk. And what was the other thing that I remembered? Now I can't remember because it's 50 years ago.
Letters from the Prime Minister of the day, a different Trudeau. Vancouver's then Mayor too, talking about demolishing a whole bunch of buildings in downtown to make room for Pacific Centre.
I've got a granddaughter just this age,
So it's just remarkable to think of that passage of time.
It was a time of rising inflation. The year humans walked on the moon for the first time, Yoko Ono and John Lennon also visited Parliament Hill. Anne Walmsley remembers it all like it was yesterday. Her photo was in the paper when they put the capsule in the ground.
My mom and dad cut it out and kept it for years. That's a bit surreal, for sure. Yeah, kind of exciting. So nice to see people that, some of them we haven't seen for 50 years.
A reunion of classmates and gathering of generations.
Incredible opportunity to reconnect with everybody is just incredible.
And if you're wondering what changes in 5 decades,
I don't feel that much different inside than I did 50 years ago. No. I can't. I can't jump off swings like I used to. But.
Here it is, 50 years later, to the class of '69. Tina Lovegreen, CBC News, Vancouver.
They all look fantastic.
They all look great. Have you ever done a time capsule?
No, but that is so cool. Does schools still do it?
I had one. We opened it up about 15 years after.
Oh, that's relatively soon then.
Yes,
if I must
it
say.
was pretty soon, and
it's not 50 years.
I didn't really enjoy it. Well, some parts were nice to read, the letter to yourself, but some parts were interesting. I don't know.
That's a nice story. Nice way to wrap up the broadcast tonight.
Yes.
You're always going to find our news program online at cbc.ca/BC.
Our next local news is here with Dan Burrett at 11 o'clock after the National. Have a good night.
Good night.